This is The Extra Mile.
Hey everyone, this is the Extra Mile and Caleb Spear along with
G5.
the G5. Today we're online and we're streaming with brother Jacob Harlow coming all the way from South Dakota, correct? South
That
Dakota?
should be right.
All right,
That's
South Dakota. Introduce yourself to our guests. We're excited to talk with you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Harlow. As they said, I'm from Pierre, South Dakota, the capital of the North State here of South Dakota, and I actually am a police officer here for the city of Pierre. I've been in law enforcement now for about 11 years, a little bit more than that. So that's kind of my line of work.
That's great. That's kind of what we wanted to pinpoint on for those that are listening or watching, is to get the police perspective, the law enforcement perspective, and how to address the community and how to be Christ-like in the good times and even in the really hard situations as well. And I think Jacob here has that. I know I've lived in South Dakota, I lived in Pierre, and I know it's like a great city, beautiful city, has the river going right there, but it can be a rough city as well too. And so we want to see that perspective, and that's what we're trying to do. Always try to see different perspectives.
Yeah, this is a unique one. Before we dive into the cop life, just tell us real quickly, how did you find Christ? What led you to becoming a Christian real quick?
So I guess when we talk about that, I'm probably about as uneventful as a Christian walk can be. As far as my father was a minister of the church since I was in first grade. Yep. And a teacher's kid, so I never got away with anything as a child.
That's why you're a cop.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. So grew up in the church all my life. And so it's always been a part of my life. And so I've always known God and was raised in a very godly home with two great parents as examples of good Christians and how they should live their lives. And so came to Christ at an early age, putting him on in baptism, and have been, now married to my wife now for 12 years. And she's also a faithful Christian woman who also, for the most part, grew up in the church as well with her family. And now I've got 4 kids that I'm trying to do the same for. So,
oh man, so full, busy schedule then. Man,
those are wonderful blessings.
Yes, they are. Awesome. They are.
Right on.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So how did you get into law enforcement? What led you down that path?
So it's actually kind of a funny story. So before being a minister in the church, my father was actually a police officer in Kansas City, Missouri. And his father before him also served in law enforcement as well. So I'm actually a 3rd-generation law enforcement officer.
Cool.
So it's something that I always wanted to do. And then when I met my now wife and had conversations with her about what I wanted to do and made sure she was okay with that, graduated from college, and then I pursued that as my career. Started my law enforcement career in Kansas, and I worked down there for 6 years and then moved up here to South Dakota and have been working up here for the last several years.
Oh, wow. And how do you like South Dakota?
I enjoy it. As you said, the Missouri River goes right through the city of Pierre. It splits Pierre and Fort Pierre in this community. So I love the outdoors, the beautiful ability to get out and have different seasons for my kids to enjoy and different activities. There's lots of hunting and fishing and never ending water supply that I don't have to pay for to let the kids swim in, and we kayak and
that's not Lubbock.
and different things.
That's horrible. That's the opposite of Lubbock. Yeah, and there you go.
Oh yeah, you were saying you gotta get snow ready right before we start recording.
It's horrible.
Yeah, but he gets to
Yes,
see.
yeah, they're
Yes.
yeah, we have about 6 months of winter, and then we pack the other 3 seasons into the other 6 months. So, and they vary very quickly.
Yeah. It was beautiful when I was up there a few weeks ago, and you just saw the colors, and it was nice seeing at least trees where we don't really have too many trees.
I know.
Yeah.
Wait, so how do you two know each other? What's your guys' connection?
Well, I met Jacob at the church there, Madison Avenue Church of Christ, where I went when I lived in South Dakota.
Gotcha.
And I was doing my grandfather's funeral, and Jacob was there assisting with all the church stuff, and he was a really big help. I wouldn't have been able to do it without him, so it was really good. Him and a bunch of members as well. Yeah, really helped out.
That's cool.
And it ended up being perfect. That was
Yeah.
good.
That's always neat to meet other
Yeah, it
brothers and
worked out well.
sisters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
It is
All right, let's dive in.
encouraging to know that.
It's encouraging to know what?
It's encouraging to know that, all across the nation from different walks of life, we have brothers and sisters that have, in Christ that deal with different things, and that, like you said, you were able to travel all the way, essentially across the country almost, and fit right in the church and be able to do God's work. So,
yeah. It is a beautiful thing, especially when we're unified as one body. And that's really what we want to do here on this podcast and interview as well, is not just interview, crazy people that are just
Crazy people.
That's a bad word, but like, you know what I'm saying. It's just the everyday Christian that's going through everyday problems that can relate with the everyday listener that's tuning in.
Right. And yet we'll all still bring our own perspectives, like you said.
Exactly. They try to help us get through every single day. And from your cop perspective, Luke 3 is a text that we thought of kind of going into this. John the Baptist is preaching. He's saying, prove your repentance. And he's telling soldiers, one of the listeners there, to be the best soldier they can be that is, that's God-fearing. And it says soldiers who also ask him, and what shall we do? And he said to them, do not extort money from anyone by threats or by false accusation, and be content with your wages. So stand out, be different, and prove you've been changed by God.
Yeah, that's you're an interesting dynamic as someone who has authority from the government. Those quick reminder to our listeners, like Romans 13, 1 Peter 2, Christians submit to the government for the Lord's sake. Yeah, we talked about this with the teens too. Yeah. Jeremiah 29 talks about the idea that we're all exiles, but as an exile, you live out you're looking for, what's the term I'm looking for? You're looking to still do good to the community, seek the well-being of the city. That's the term I'm looking for. But that puts you in this interesting slot, though, where you do have authority from the state, yet still being in submission to Christ as the ultimate authority. So what's the door you're opening here, George?
Well, with authority comes sometimes conflict, and that's what we want to bring out. And how does a God-fearing police officer, how does he handle conflict? And what would be healthy for the average Christian and God-fearing person to handle conflict?
Who's not a cop.
Yeah. Yeah, who doesn't have that authority.
Sure. Well, first, I wanted to kind of jump back a second and talk about, Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2, as you were mentioning those. We as Americans have a lot of freedoms that we enjoy. And I think it's important for us to realize, especially as Christians, that, we are still expected to not only be examples of Christ and what he stood for and to live for him, but in doing so, we also are expected, as Paul tells us in Romans, to also obey the authority. Now, we understand that if those two conflict with each other, that we need to honor God on above all. But Romans chapter 13, verse 3, Paul makes it very clear in that verse that you don't have anything to fear from the authority if you're doing what is right. In fact, he says that just do what is good and you'll receive approval. And easier said than done by all means. But
that's right. That's why I think to add to what you're saying, Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But that what you're saying, that's why I think Romans
Go
12
right
and
ahead.
Romans 13 go hand in hand. Romans 12 tells us how to do good and to love our enemies and to, not do evil against
Yes,
other people. And then that same citizenship should go right into Romans 13.
absolutely. So as far as conflict goes, one of the principles that I've tried to honestly apply in all aspects is just the simple idea of respect. Um, Something that I feel is leaving our society quickly is the old-fashioned idea, if you will, of good, e- even Southern respect, of whether you know somebody or not. You're giving them a wave, you're being respectful to them, not even knowing who they are, what walk of life they come from, and you treat them like you would any other person that you come in contact with, and that that Southern hospitality, if you will.
Yeah, that small town
And that's
culture.
something that I try to, yes, yes. Um, that's something that I try to employ on the street every day, that I understand that I'm coming up on people and meeting people most often in the worst day of their lives, whether it's because they're a victim of a crime, or they just got into a car accident, or or a plethora of other things. And so I try to be respectful, because I know that their anger necessarily isn't about or aimed towards me. And when I'm dealing with necessarily head-on conflict with somebody that may not be that may not like or appreciate law enforcement, especially those that I may be looking at to make an arrest or something along those lines. um, Romans chapter 3 and verse 33 tells us that we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so I have to remind myself constantly that, in the eyes of God, I'm no different or no better than these people that I'm dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
And so if I treat them the way I want to be treated, again, going back to Matthew, um, then I feel like I have a better uh, chance at actually making a difference in their lives and in the lives of my community.
That's really good. I like that empathy that you put in there, understanding their perspective in the situation, that it could be the worst day of their life, and kind of approaching that with some sort of empathy.
And the word respect.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah,
Yes. Yep.
respect is a common one. I feel like our culture's kind of misaligned on, and that's like you're saying. It's hard to deal with people who, maybe in a just sense deserve, such a punishment or crime or whatnot. But like you're saying, that view, that humble view, really changes that outlook. We'd mentioned First Peter 2 briefly. Verse 17 just says to honor everyone. It just throws everyone there. Love each other, the brotherhood,
Yes.
fear God, and honor the emperor, which is a wild take because I think the emperor under Peter's days was Nero, and he was extremely hostile. Nothing that we know in America when it comes to persecution. Not that he wanted to stand up for what's right, like you said, Acts 5, that we must obey God rather than man. But he still honored the position and recognized such authority. That's a difficult balance in there.
it is. It is. It is. But
Yes.
I think coming from
And
respect, you're loving the other person, and that was your concept.
right. And I, trying to go back to, um, forgive me, I can't think of the passage, but the greatest commands that they challenged Jesus with, as far as loving our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, but
Mm-hmm.
also loving our neighbor as ourself.
Yes.
Um, and there again, if uh, for me, I try to tell other officers, I want you to treat this person like you would if your grandmother was standing right here.
Mm.
um, and I know that I always have my Lord and Savior watching and seeing everything. I mean, He's ever present with me, and so I understand that all I'm doing, whether the public may never see it, um, I know that God is, and I want to handle that person with dignity and respect, uh, in so much as I can.
That's really good. Kind of going into our next question a little bit. Being in law enforcement, you see different types of people, really all kinds of people with different backgrounds. I know South Dakota has a lot of different demographics there. Um, and there's people with really hard, terrible lives. And that doesn't mean the police officer is, might not have a kind of a rough life as well. I've seen police officers with rough lives, but they're having relationships and connections with these people, and you're engaging with different kinds of people with different backgrounds and different lives. What have you learned when it comes to building relationships with someone who's entirely different from you?
Again, I think we touched on it earlier. The key word there is empathy.
Mm-hmm.
To do your best to listen to what they have to say, to allow them the chance to explain the position that they're coming from, the viewpoint that they're coming from, and try to put yourself in, not with our preconceived notions of something, but understanding their perspective from their lives.
Mm.
And I think when we do that, we have a better chance at actually having a conversation, and without, starting to have that headbutting of, well, my opinion's better than your opinion. Well, they're both opinions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people like their opinions. It makes them feel valued.
Yeah, listening is a big one. What you
Yes.
just said made me think of Proverbs 18:13. If one gives an answer before he hears, before he listens, the Bible calls him a fool. If we don't listen out to the other person, I know this is something I've struggled with for sure. Where even if even if I am right, if I still don't listen to the other person, we're not going to make any progress. Even if, which is a big if, we are right. If we listen, we probably learn there's something, maybe even a lot more than what we originally thought, where we might misunderstand or be wrong. I think that does empathy, and that does tie back to what you're saying about respect too. The golden rule from Matthew 22, like you alluded to.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Everyone knows something we don't, and I think we can always learn something if we're willing to listen and get their perspective on it. I was listening to something, and I always, this line stuck with me: listen not to reply, but listen to understand.
Yeah.
And when we can do that, that's really how we can have empathy, when we're trying to understand where they're coming from.
Right.
And that kind of ties in what you were just talking about. I apologize, but I was just thinking you were talking about handling conflict. So for most Christians who aren't police officers, and I know there are many, but most of us who don't have that authority, how should Christians be handling conflicts just out in the open public? I know that ranges a wide variety of issues, from a robbery to just someone yelling in the parking lot. But in general, how do you think Christians, average citizens who aren't cops, be submissive to authority yet still maybe help others? How can we do that?
The best way I can answer that question is through James. The book of James, chapter 1, verses 19 and 20 says, to let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, and the important one, slow to anger. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. So if you can learn, number one, to tame your tongue, to stop talking before you've had a chance to think about it. If you go back to like kindergarten, they, take a deep breath and count to 10, if you will. And if we can learn to, again, that key idea of being quiet and listening, you'll have your chance eventually to say what you need to say, or possibly you won't. And that's okay. Because again, you still know what you believe. You're still going to stand firm for your beliefs, whether you get your point across or not. And that, you talked about the proverb earlier. If you're speaking out of anger, you're no better than a fool.
That's a really good point. I think sometimes we use our words as weapons, and we want to get the last word in. And so if someone's yelling at us or having a conflict or arguing, we want to make sure that our words beat them down, essentially. But I like what you're saying. If we know what we believe, they're just feeding us information to either add on to or not add on to, or to leave the situation as well. I don't think leaving the situation doesn't have to be a lose as well.
Yeah, I
Well,
guess
I mean,
I
you go back to talking
go ahead.
you go back to talking about that idea of being, if it, I know not politically correct necessarily, but being the bigger man and walking away, and that is oftentimes harder. And I tell kids all the time this that is a harder concept to get across than being able to learn to even discuss or have a healthy discussion on something.
Right. Yeah, I guess I'm the one who needed this podcast more than anyone. I don't know what you were going to say as the cop. I didn't have verses pictured in mind, but this is just me genuinely thinking. I was not picturing as many verses and stuff of just listening and being reasonable, which I don't know why I'm super shocked at that. But he's like, look, the standards are low, seemingly, but it shows you how hard it really is, because our natural tendency, like you're talking about with anger, is if George slaps me across the face here, my natural response is going to be to want to hit him right back. It's truly,
Right.
a work of the Spirit, right? Galatians
Yeah.
5, to not do such a thing. And it's very interesting how you said you meet people who very often are having the worst day of their lives. Either they've made a huge mistake and they're being arrested, or it was just some sort of tragedy of some kind. As a police officer, sometimes you'll even see the worst of people. So how do you still keep your faith and remain loving to humanity, God's image bearers?
Well, first and foremost, it comes from my faith in God, because I know, number one, as I said before, we've all sinned. We need to understand that anyone who follows the example of Christ and follow his commands has, as Ephesians says, a hope of salvation. And that is the key. It is not, I, talking communication is big. I rely on my wife a lot. And I also rely on my brothers and sisters in the police department, as well as my brothers and sisters in Christ, to be able to get, some of those things off. As I said, I have the blessing also of my father having law enforcement experience, but also a very godly man that I can call and bounce things off of and help me through things. But again, I really rely on, even if this turns out to be my worst day on earth, I still have that hope of salvation, and I can get through this. Um, and I know that God has a plan in all things.
Mm-hmm.
I watch a lot of movies, and every time they seem to, not every time, but many times when you watch a movie and it depicts this cop, and he'll say, I don't believe in God because that's just the things I've seen.
Right.
My dad was a cop, was a policeman just on the very city that Fort Pierre, not Pier, but just across the river, dealing with the same types of people. And some of the stories that he's told me were horrible. And but the thing is, he said that it strengthened his faith. That seeing that it didn't lower his faith in humanity, it actually strengthened his faith in humanity, because just because there's bad, that means there's also good too. And he got to see a lot of the good in people as well.
Absolutely.
And he got to see people really help others as well and assist in that. And I think we can get lost in just the bad and rely on the bad and lose hope in that. And that ties into what you were saying, is having hope in salvation.
Yeah, seeing the good.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask him, like, we're seeing the good in people. What's something like you find that all people of all backgrounds, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, what do you think something you see as a police officer in the community that everyone just kind of universally shares? Is there something that we all really have in common?
Even in, after 11 years in law enforcement, and as you said, dealing with various situations, whether good or bad, I still believe that for the most part, people care about other people. I really do. Just as we all get angry and we all get mad, and when those things happen, we tend that is when we allow our anger to take control, and that's when temptation slips in to do other things. And of course, things like alcohol and drugs play a factor into that as well, as far as our uh, ability to make good decisions. But when I'm talking to people, you know, we talk about these disasters that happen, if you will, these horrible, whether natural disasters or terrorism or whatever it is. And what do you see afterwards? You see everyone in that community coming together to rebuild, to work together to, as you guys were talking about last winter down in Texas, you guys had that horrible freeze that affected so many people. And yet, even up here in South Dakota, we heard stories of, farmers from across the nation bringing in hay to help out people they'd never met. People bringing generators to neighbors that they didn't really know to help them warm up or charge a phone for an hour or whatever it is. I truly believe that people honestly do care about other people. It's simply learning how to show it all the time as opposed to the good times.
That's really good.
Yeah, I love that. And we say this comes up all the time in our one-off studies, but it goes back to like Genesis 1 and 2, like where
does.
the design of people is to tend the garden, this idea to cultivate. Still in society, we want to build, like you're saying, when we tear down and when we see value in other people. That's the moral law. We see value in other people because we're,
God created us and he said it was good. And I think there's this basic instinct to do good. The problem is Satan comes in and we live in a fallen world.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Yep.
I like focusing on the good. Very good.
Kind of, you mentioned community. Community is coming together, and you've seen the highs and the lows of a community. What should or where should Christians really be engaged in order to be helpful in the community? Which sometimes people don't even know what to
that's
do.
a tough, right.
Yeah.
When it comes to, every community is different, obviously. And so every community has different needs or different opportunities to serve and to help out. But really what I try to get across to people or I guess my understanding has become that we can serve others in our community everywhere we go each and every day. When we are, going back to our topic of respect, but also, the simple fruits of the Spirit. And if we can employ those, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, when we can employ those, we can make huge differences in the lives of others all around us, just in our kindness, if nothing else. And so, there are, if you're looking for specifics, talk with your community leaders. They can give you specifics on where you can best help out or in what ways. But when it comes to just, an everyday person, just being kind to other people, just having that smile on your face, not being necessarily in a hurry to get everywhere, and showing some care and respect for other people can make a huge difference.
I like those points, especially slowing down, because in our communities all over the world, all over America at least, it's just this idea of staying busy and staying ahead and keep moving forward and keep doing this, slowing down, observing your community, and that will help us observe the needs that are needed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because now we're talking about self-centeredness where we naturally go when I'm not even thinking twice about the person I'm engaged with at the drive-thru or the grocery store or wherever else.
Right.
Some of that might be our phones, but there's a lot of that.
Yep.
Yeah. We get so focused on other things.
Well, as we close off, do you have, we usually ask this most of our guests, but do you have like a favorite verse, story, book in the Bible that's just like what jumps out to you? I know sometimes it changes, but like, what's your favorite verse or story in Scripture?
um, uh, I've got a couple, I guess, if you would, but
Yeah.
if I had to narrow it down, Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 and 6, but Matthew 10:45 as well. For Jesus didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. And that's, I try to use that daily as far as what I do, and fully relying on God, as Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, talks about, in all things looking to God for the answers.
I like that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and don't lean on your own understanding. Proverbs 3:5. That's a good idea.
It is, especially when we're
and in all your ways. Yeah. And verse 6 follows that with, in all your ways acknowledge him and he will direct your paths.
Yeah. So. I think that gives it a wrap. Jacob, really thank you for coming on and giving us your perspective as a policeman. You guys have
Absolutely.
a big job of service, and as Christians, we all have a job of service. And I think we need to try to live that out in our communities, our brothers and sisters, with everyone we come in contact, always loving. And so, Jacob, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, we really do. Stay safe
Absolutely.
out there.
Thank you for having me.
We'll make sure to pray for you.
Thank you.
All right, that's a wrap.
I appreciate that.
Go so.